Our two special guests now are very dear friends of mine. They live very close by me. It's Norm Nelson and Cher Nelson. And as I mentioned, we did try and get Sonny and Cher, but we couldn't get them. So we've got much better than Sonny and Cher.
Sonny's not feeling well these days.
No, he's not. No.
Well, first of all, Norm, your dad was a very well-known broadcaster. Tell us just a little bit of background on yourself, and then we'll do the same with Cher.
Well, my dad's name was Wilbur Nelson. He pastored a church, several churches, for almost all of his adult life. He actually started out in ministry with Bob Pierce, the founder of World Vision.
Wow.
And the two of them hosted a radio program together, and that's how he got started in radio. And here we are in our 65th year, Dan.
What year did he start?
1944.
Dear me.
It's a long time ago.
I was just 4 years old, and I was just a little kid.
He was just a little kid, too.
That's right. That's right. But
so you were raised in a broadcasting home, really, then?
That's right.
And was it all reel-to-reel stuff? Was it pretty old?
It was live.
Live? Oh.
It was live. It was the big discs and all of that. Yeah, this was the grand old days of radio, the pioneering period of the medium.
Yeah. Wow. So you went away from broadcasting for a while, didn't you? You decided you didn't want to follow your dad.
Well, I love working with students, and that's true even
Still.
today. I was a college chaplain. I taught in religion department, also taught in prep school back in New England, and very committed to education, still have a love for it.
Yeah.
And then the Lord finally laid on my heart, and it took the Lord to do it, that it was time for me to come back to California from New England and to go to work for my dad. And we worked together for a number of years, and I learned a great deal from him. He was a great broadcaster. He had a real gift for it. And he believed, and I do too, that God gifts people to be broadcasters. And Dad certainly had that gift. And so, but you know how it is growing up as the son of a well-known figure in Christian ministry. I went through some of the rebellions that
I can't believe
the PKs do. I think I've outgrown it, maybe not. But But anyway, it was a real privilege then to be able to work with him in my more mature years.
Yeah.
And now, of course, we're doing Compassion Radio.
Compassion Radio. You
That's
even
right.
changed the name. That was your dad still alive when you changed the name?
Yes, he was still alive and endorsed it. Oh. And it was important for him to do that because he had quite a constituency across the country. And he was very kind in that regard. He understood that people might interpret this name change as a coup.
Oh, okay.
And it was no such thing. He went on the air, and the program was called The Morning Chapel Hour, and it was really funny. He said, first of all, we want to be on the air at other times than the morning. There is no chapel, and we're on for 28 minutes. That's not an hour. So a morning chapel hour is false advertising.
Yeah. How interesting.
So, yeah, he endorsed the move.
Wow. Now, Cher, you were in the music industry for a while, were you?
Dear. Dan, we can't go back that far.
No, just tell us a little bit about your life before you got involved with Compassion Radio.
Well, and we were both preacher's kids, so we both started pretty much the same way. Definitely dedicated to serving the Lord and had a definite passion for overseas. And I spent many years of my life on the road singing with evangelistic musical groups. Yes. And in a former life was with the Continental Singers. Spent many years going all over the world with them. We also did tours in conjunction with the Jesus Film and did things everywhere. So when the Lord brought us together, and Norm had done so much work in Central America, and he had a real passion for the mission field too, but we both thought that part of our life was over. Along the way, I did, television shows, the Dean Martin Show and the Cher Show and various things, but that was basically survival, not a passion.
You went on as a singer, as part of the singing group, And what was the Sandy Patty connection there?
Well, Sandy, we sort of discovered, I also was involved with the Christian Artist Seminar in the Rockies.
Yeah.
And,
at Estes Park.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And we started that years ago. And when Sandy was first found and made her first album, we were the first ones to be able to put her on both at Estes Park and at the Dove Awards in Nashville, and sort of introduced her to the music field.
What
so
a
she's
talent,
just been a good friend for a long, long time. But Norm and I thought that part of our lives was all over because he was going back to
do
work
you
with
sing
his dad.
as well, Norm?
Sure.
Or are you...
I used to.
Yeah. That's true for both of us.
As part of a group? Or...
yeah, I've done some backup singing. Sang with Ralph Carmichael in his ensemble a number of years ago. Music has been a part of our lives in various ways. And as a matter of fact, I remember saying to Cher, not long after my father passed away, my mother passed away before he did, and I realized one day in a way that I never had before that my parents gave to me the gift of sacred music, of music that honors Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And other than the gift of life, I don't think there's a greater gift that they bestowed on me.
Yeah.
My both of them were wonderful musicians, and they gave me that gift. And the words of the great hymns and gospel songs and all of that go through my mind all the time and resurface over and over again. And they have become an increasing source of spiritual strength in my life, and I would say, if I can speak for Cher, for both of us.
It's really interesting because we lived almost identical lives, with coast to coast from each other, but the rich heritage that we got from each of our parents, I don't know who I would be without that.
Now, what's so unique, Norm, about both of your ministries is that you are trying to educate the audience about the world we live in. And you don't just talk about it, but you go there. Tell us some of the terrible places you've been to.
Well, you know, the key, Dan, if I may contradict you, but I know what you mean by that, is to show people that all of these terrible places, these horrible places, in the world's outlook on things, are God's places. They belong to Him. He is there. He is in Afghanistan, Iraq. He is in Cuba. He is in Sudan. He is in Darfur. He is in all these difficult places of the world. He is building His church in all of those places. And, of course, so many of those countries are Muslim countries. We kind of specialize in that these days. And it's so easy to write them off. They are even defined in some official sense by the State Department here as our enemies. And in a political sense, we understand what that means, of course. But in terms of our loyalty to Jesus Christ and our awareness of what God is doing in the world, we are particularly committed to the fact and the reality that all these countries belong to Him and that He is calling out His church in all those places. And we have the marvelous privilege of being able to travel to those places, to meet with believers there, to dialogue with government leaders and leaders of social movements, educators, people of influence in all of those countries, and to have the opportunity to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, not always primarily through the spoken word, but we seek to do it through the compassion of Jesus Christ expressed in concrete acts of mercy toward people who are suffering. Then they ask the question, why would you do this? As a Chinese young man did in China after we had just come out of North Korea. He said, why would you go there? You're Americans. And they know their history, and they know their political science and foreign policy and all that, and they know that technically speaking, North Korea and the United States are enemies. There is never a definitive treaty signed to end that war, the Korean War. He said, why would you do that? Well,
thank you for asking.
That was an open,
perfect question. And we had the opportunity to say, well, we're Americans, we're loyal to our country, and all of that. We love America as you love your country of China. But God is at work in North Korea. and he called us to go there. He had a job for us to do.
Yeah.
That's why we went and took medical supplies and all of these things, was to show forth his compassion.
Well, it's very interesting because, you know, we both travel so much. I've been to North Korea once. I think you've been more than once, haven't you?
Yes.
Tell us about your last trip, what you found.
Well, Cher, I've been doing all the talking. How would you like to introduce Cuba?
Well, you're asking about North Korea,
You want to
right?
do North Korea first?
But I want to say you're right. People always tell us we need a new travel agent because we never go anywhere unless there's death or famine or disaster or whatever. But the good thing that we found out is that there are no God-forsaken places.
Yeah.
God is there. We had a very interesting experience this last time. Every time that we've been to North Korea, we've had an opportunity to really talk with at least one, if not more, people face to face and really be able to present what we believe as Americans. They think that all Americans are Christians and they want to know what we believe, and it's very, very easy to witness one-on-one. And this last time we were there, we did find that things were changing a little bit. Instead of just 1 or 2 government cars on the road, they were up to about 4 or 5 on these wide boulevards that could handle hundreds of cars. We saw a little bit more freedom with the people. They were a little bit more accessible to us. We weren't quite as heavily guarded as we have been before. And again, on this trip, we had an incredible experience of a young man coming and pouring his heart out about how he would like to leave the country, but because of his family situation, he doesn't think that he ever can because there would be retribution to his family. But being able to tell him that it isn't the escape from North Korea that you need. What you need is hope. And where we have found hope is in Jesus Christ.
You know, it's very, very interesting that Kim Jong-il, who's this crazy guy, just recently built a Russian Orthodox church in Pyongyang. I mean, can either of you explain that?
Well, we can tell you something else that's happening. Apparently, there is a Christian university in China that Kim Jong-il has become familiar with. And apparently, it's doing quite a good job because he's very impressed with it. He has asked that a campus of this Christian based university in China be put into the capital city of Pyongyang in North Korea. And not long ago, I had the opportunity to talk with a gentleman here in the United States who is an educator, a PhD, and who is behind the effort to move a campus of this university into the capital city of North Korea. It is a Christian university. Now, who knows about that? That's the kind of message that we have the privilege, that God has given us, the privilege of introducing to people to let them know that God is doing things in North Korea. And that things are changing.
And it's one of the reasons that we don't believe that we need to go in and take out every leader that isn't gospel-based and committed to propagating the gospel. God has his people in leadership by his own design. And, you know, the government could be overthrown in North Korea, but what would we get if that were true? But God seems to be working either in Kim Jong-il's heart or at least through him for other reasons to be able for the gospel to more freely be distributed.
It was very interesting that I've done quite a bit of work with Billy Graham, and Billy Graham went in many times to North Korea, and we had a long chat about it one day, and he shared with me that Kim Il-sung, who's the father of Kim Jong-il, was raised as a Christian and then went to Moscow and became a Saul instead of a Paul, and became this monster.
But still built the Christian church for his mother.
But what happened is near his death, he started to have visions of his sitting on his mum's lap, you're right. He built a church in memory of his Christian mother. And then first time Billy Graham went to see him, he asked him to tell him about Jesus. And several times Mr. Graham would go back, and I asked Billy Graham on one occasion, did Kim Il-sung ever accept the Lord? And he said, well, we don't know, because he invited me to go fishing with him on the last occasion. And I was going to go over there, and we were going to challenge him to make the commitment,
Right.
and he died. And I was one of the first people in after he died as part of a Christian delegation. Another bizarre situation, you know. But we talk about another country now. North Korea is so far removed from Cuba, but you've just been to Cuba, and Cuba has pretty amazing stuff going on. Tell us about the trip. Either of you jump in there.
Well, God is at work in Cuba. The church in Cuba is growing by leaps and bounds. We had the opportunity to meet with the chairman or the chairwoman of the Korean or the Cuban Church Federation, whatever the governing body is that monitors and takes care of the church in Cuba. Churches in countries like that are almost always under government control. And we had the opportunity to meet with her and to hear what God is doing. There's the establishment of pastor resource centers, 26 of them, all over the country of Cuba, so that pastors in Cuba who have bicycles can ride for, let's say, a couple of hours to one of these pastor resource centers and find theological books and resources to help them in their preparation of sermons and their growth in the knowledge of the Scriptures and theology and all of that. And this is happening now in Cuba. And it's thrilling to see that. Plus, the Methodist Church and the Baptist Church, we know, are both growing tremendously.
And on fire.
And are they on fire? We had the privilege of visiting a house church there in a city just outside of Havana. And what we discovered was a church that started 5 years ago with 7 people, a house church. Today, 5 years later, 1,500 people. That's the way the church is growing in Cuba.
And one of the things I learned when I first went to Cuba, and it may have changed since, was that there was always somebody on the front row at taking notes of the sermon to make sure that, I don't know if that still happens.
That's
They're not obvious.
That's still the requirement. They're not as dedicated about it.
To make sure that the pastor doesn't attack Fidel or now Raul Castro.
Right.
But the other thing was that in those days, and this was some years ago on my last trip, you were not allowed to evangelize outside the church building. Is that still the same there?
Still true.
But things are changing. We were there right at the turnover from Fidel to Raul. And at the time that we were staying in the hotel, our local friend was not able to come into the hotel or come up to our room or anything. That was forbidden. That has all changed. There have been a number of changes that Raul has made to help the farmers, which will help the food situation in Cuba, because, you know, they're still on ration cards and just barely surviving. They never get meat. It's an amazing situation that they've been living with for a long time. But he is making some changes, and it's very possible that some of those changes may come to the church as well. But it's not stopping anything. Although they're not allowed to evangelize on the streets, and they can't build new churches. That's against the law. But they can have prayer houses. And so the restriction is supposed to be from 7 to 11 people in a fellowship that can meet in a prayer house. Well, the people are living, you know, in one room of the house and have knocked out all the other walls to cram in as many people as they can. And their services are huge, but then they're doing training of leadership training just constantly all week and have the vision to send Cuban missionaries out all over the world. It is wonderful. So exciting to be with them.
I remember talking to a pastor once in Cuba, and he'd been in prison. And I said to him, why were you in prison? And he said, well, they said I was part of the CIA. So he said, we have a story here in Cuba that you put a rat in a room and you shut the door, and then you put a cat in the room and shut the door, and then you open the door and there is the rat dead and there is the cat smiling, and the question is, who killed the rat? And he said, the answer is the CIA.
I believe that.
And he said that was sort of like the gallows humor of the Christians. Are the Christians being persecuted now, or is it a lot easier for them?
There are still Christians who are It is not an open society by any means. And it was very unusual for a couple of Americans, a couple of gringos like Cher and me, to be permitted to go to a house church. We actually went at night and tried not to make a big deal out of it, tried not to be noticed. But what happened was that we ended up being surrounded by people who were there in one of these training programs that Cher was referring to. The young pastor came up to me. 20,000 Cubans are granted, if they win the lottery, are granted visas to come to the United States. This young couple, a pastor and his wife, won the lottery. The question was, what do? They turned it down, the opportunity to come to the United States. Cubans, many of them, dream of the day that they can have political freedom, that they can be reunited with family in the United States, those who fled Cuba many years ago, and so forth. They turned down the benefit of that lottery to stay and to rebuild this church and to serve God there in Cuba. What an incredible couple they were, and they're typical.
And because supplies are not allowed to be given to anything like a church, they simply had to build as people in their congregation could come by a few cement blocks or a few bags of cement or something. So they had been working without any income, without any help for 9 months to try to get this church back open, working day and night, shoveling, building, pounding. They just were the most amazingly dedicated people I think we've ever met.
I think what is so special about what you two do is that you're not, you're Americans, but you're world Christians. That the being part of the body of Christ worldwide. And, I think that's really important, Norm, that we've realized that, I'm an African-American. You don't look like it, but I was born in Africa. And some people say, why don't you go back there? But
we don't want you to, Dan.
I was raised in England, so I'm sort of a real mixture, And you're two Americans, and yet it's more important for you to be part of the body of Christ than to be even Americans. And I think that's a very important lesson for Christians around the world to learn.
When we first started talking about trying to bring the body of Christ back together again, the feeling here in America was sort of like, well, we have some fingers and toes that are severed around the world, and we don't even feel the pain here. We've come to really believe that it's almost the internal organs are the parts that are severed around the world. Their faith is so deep, and their love is so strong for the Lord, and their service is not even a question. If you're a Christian, of course you're going to serve the Lord. Some of the best brothers and sisters we've ever known have been from other countries. They're so challenging to us. They come and ask if we'll pray for them. And in the face of their faith and their dedication, we feel like we should kneel and have them pray for us.
That's great. Well, we've been talking with a wonderful couple, Norm and Cher Nelson. Is it compassionradio.com or org?
.com. It's .com.
If you want to find out more about their wonderful ministry at compassionradio.com, please pray for this wonderful couple, and also our dear friend Danny Diaz. We thank you for being on, and we'll see you again next time. God bless you.
His Channel, teaching the gospel on listener-supported television.